Tesla Battery Day, somewhat confusing, but some great technology. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. Wanted to thank our folks that have liked and subscribed. Also wanted to note that this show is made possible by our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy the show and would like to learn more about better investing ideas, etc., because we do extra shows in our Patreon area that are not on the main channel, please take time to head over and sign up in that space. So I wanted to thank all of you who've made comments in our page referencing many of the predictions we made that actually came true relative to Battery Day. I was sort of reluctant to do this show because we really root for Tesla to do well, and the goal is to provide good quality journalism, not necessarily to Tesla bash. So I want to note to you if you want non-truthful comments about things going on, this is a really bad channel because we cover the good and the bad, and we try to provide information that's helpful to everyone to understand what's going on, invest and trade it well. So we're not a channel that embraces the idea of only go through what's perfect, and that way you don't get in trouble. So you guys don't have to send me any notes because it's just how the channel kind of works. So I wanted to take some time today to review, some general themes that we picked up on when it came to Battery Day. As I was finishing up, it just seemed that there's a long drawn-out process where Elon was really trying to target that $25,000 per vehicle price point, and then the technology and batteries that would take to get there. So I really think that the goal that he has in mind is excellent. The technology process that he has in mind is excellent to get there. And so I think it all makes sense. What was kind of strange is if you watch the stock price, every time there was a point at which Tesla arrived at a spot where Elon indicated that we still need to figure out this area, at those points, the stock price would fall about $10 every time he made that comment. So I really think that, where we're at right now is in this zone where there are a lot of people that want to see Tesla do well and ready to buy their products. But there's also a lot of things that are not done, so I could see the year or two plan for getting this done making sense because there are some technological challenges that they need to work through. What I wanted to sort of push out there is something that's called in economics marginal utility. So if you think about it, Elon actually made a comment, which is that what's happening is right now 100% of the inputs to the Chinese vehicles are going to be coming from China by the end of this calendar year. So when we enter that, we're in an interesting position because what he also indicated was when you add up all those costs, when it's a Chinese input, at 100% China production, they're going to achieve a 50% cut in the cost of the vehicle. So let's say if the Chinese vehicle, when it was going over as an American vehicle, was starting off about $45,000, in theory, at least the costs would be somewhere, let's say it's half that, let's call it $25K, but then you have to mark up. So in theory, they should be able to make 20% margins on a $30,000 to $32,000 vehicle. So one of the things that I'm confused about and why I chose the name for this show was you can actually, there's a lot of ways to get that cheaper vehicle done. What consumers have said is they need 300 miles before they be comfortable in an electric vehicle. If we push into lower cost inputs from a place like China, the question that I'm introducing is it possible that Tesla could achieve the price target they have in mind within 4 or 5K without all the technology that we just saw, based on lower cost inputs in the manner that we just saw as well? So the other thing I kept wondering about is, should you put a smaller battery pack in where you're only capable of 200, 220, and then people are relying on superchargers to get them the further distance? There, again, another route you could get down to that lower price point. What I'm angling for with the whole idea of marginal utility is just the fact that, yes, we want that $25,000 vehicle, but the other question mark is, what about the fact that you've almost achieved that already? And yes, there's an incremental, call it 3 to 5K, that you haven't made it already, but it's nice to have that close to the number vehicle now rather than 2, 3, 4 years from now. And so I guess I'm wondering about whether or not that vehicle might not already be ready, particularly if it's coming out of China. So, and I think that's the unfortunate piece. This also brings up another question, which is kind of what happens to Germany in the competition for Model Ys that are being produced at half the cost in China versus, sort of focusing on the high-end vehicles in Fremont. Interesting question. I don't have an answer for that, but I think it's a fascinating circumstance that's going on. In general, a lot of people have pointed out that they felt like Battery Day was a dud. I actually think that the technology looked really awesome. The command of everybody of what they're doing, pretty awesome. I just feel like there's just all these questions like, why not have Panasonic work on the plant? The answer to that would be, you also, when you're producing a lot, you want to have your own test facility for small runs of batteries that might represent the future, and that's exactly what they're doing. So that kind of makes sense. Obviously, Elon announced CATL and LG officially as their providers in China. We kind of interviewed one of our Silicon Valley technology executives, and he pointed out that the Chinese weren't going to allow Panasonic to sort of come in and start producing just like they were for Tesla in the U.S. because they basically paid for the factory and they want the jobs associated with those batteries being produced. So unlikely that they would actually allow the Panasonic partnership to spread out into China. I think there are some interesting questions that lurk behind, and only occasionally do we get some interesting answers from Elon on, what production capacity might be short and long term at different facilities and from different suppliers. So in general, I'd have to say that it's good that we know that Q3 should be a good one based on the numeric methods that we talked about that the banks were using to look at software uploads. I think it's a good situation. I'd have to say that the whole day was kind of strange because the Maxwell acquisition and other acquisitions they've done to really develop their own battery capabilities, I thought would be way further along if you want to introduce this. I'd have to say an analogy that came up to mind to me relative to what we saw and where Tesla is currently and when they've chosen to introduce it. My grandmother made a comment to me starting when I was about 5 years old up until I was 11 or 12. There was a rule in our house that you always had to wear clean underwear because if you got into an accident and you went to the hospital, you didn't want the police to find that we didn't have any cleanliness in our family and someone would go out of the house in non-clean underwear and the whole family would be embarrassed. And what I was thinking about with that analogy here is just the fact that, the degree to which Elon went through, didn't show a battery, showed a bunch of schematics, indicated that there are 10,000 units available. It seemed like they were kind of showing their underwear. And I found this very strange, and we talked about this in one of my shows where we were saying that there's a lot of PhDs around the world that are sitting in these big firms, and their job is to sit there and watch that show. And they understand 99% of what's been said there. Elon indicated that he was going to limit what was being said to avoid competitors. But they can kind of figure out the percentage of it that wasn't there from the stuff that he talked about. So I just found that part confusing too, because you might want to generally talk about what you're doing, but the degree to which Elon went to it, I think actually saved competitors a lot of time of experimenting with different solutions before they arrive at, what to expect from Tesla, what might work based on the research that they've been doing. So I really think this highlighted my point about the fact that I found Battery Day confusing of a concern, because when you're showing your underwear to that degree, you now have the problem of all these people have a bunch of things that they don't have to figure out which path to go down and test their way through those different paths. They could simply tear that up and start out from what they're seeing being done by Tesla, and then starting to prepare solutions that mirror what they saw and what they know of, is in the process of the production of these batteries. So I'd have to say that I think it's good. I guess it's good that there's a need or want for transparency by Tesla. I don't think it's a horrible thing. I'm sort of concerned, though, because we're in an industry zone where 6 months, a year worth of production time or delivery time could be the difference between out of business or in business. And so watching Elon sort of give up the crown jewels, I guess, was a little bit concerning for me, because I'd love to see the company succeed. And after spending all that money on R&D, it'd be great for them to not have a bunch of competitors that get to shorten the time prior to them delivering their products. Now, I guess the other thing that I would say is that I'm glad Tesla has Panasonic as a partner, because obviously they're doing their own R&D, and they still retain R&D that's improving the current batteries. So I think we'll continue to see incremental increase in range. The one other thought that I've been sort of focused on from a value or marginal utility standpoint is that we're in a zone right now where 300 miles is sort of the holy grail. Once we're there, consumers are satisfied at a rate of 75 to 80%. There's that last 20% that wants 400 to 500 miles of range. And obviously that's not available yet, but it's soon to be available from people perhaps like Lucid, and Tesla does offer it for a higher price. What I'm really thinking about here, though, is that one of the challenges we have is that last 10% or 20% could represent 50 or 60% increase in cost in terms of getting there. And I'm wondering, at what point is there diminishing returns to the degree that where you're at, if you've got the consumer ear and you've got that done, do you sort of go the other way and stop burning costs in that and sort of use those extra resources to do things like, one idea might be, when I watched this whole thing, I was thinking, with the resources and energy going into the battery plant, I can see why the Semi and the Roadster aren't done, because that's another factory, that's a lot of talent to put the factory together and get those vehicles produced. And so, in essence, I just felt like our Semi and our Roadster are sitting in the battery factory to some extent versus being finished products. And we'd love to see a transition to get those done, because the suggestion is that by Bill Gates and others, it really doesn't work right now. And I guess that's entirely possible, but at least we could try building a factory so that when it is ready to roll, there's a place to build it, rather than saying, well, where are we going to build these? So we'll see how all this plays out. As you know, Nikola's stock price is falling dramatically, driven by some of the claims that they've made. We would love to see Tesla start producing, because the reason why the EU and others are doing hydrogen trucks is that nobody's been able to get range on semis at a reasonable level thus far. So, and when we're working with electric, so there's a lot of goals in terms of emission control in that space that are not being met because of it. And very short range trucks from electric really aren't getting the job done in terms of this answer solution, et cetera. And we'd love to see some progress in that regard. At any rate, I want to thank you for taking time out. We were rooting for Tesla. Sad to see some of the results that came out of Battery Day. Hopeful that we'll start seeing sort of outcomes that are reflective of the hard work that's going on, that maybe aren't 2 or 3 years out from where we're currently at. The final note is perhaps the most stunning thing was the fact that the number of folks that have talked about Maxwell and how amazing they are, And I was just stunned to see Elon talk about the number of times they're on the third iteration of taking the Maxwell technology to the next level in order to get the dry erase process working. Very surprised by that, because I could see now why the stock price was very low when they bought it, because it's really not ready for prime time. And it sounds like it needs more iterations to get it to market. And so I'm hopeful that it works out, because there's a lot of money spent there to try to move that along. And so I'm extremely hopeful that it works out. At any rate, we want to remind you of your health tips. Don't forget 25 leg lifts while seated and a 5-pound weight on your leg. Don't go to bed within 4 hours of eating, minimum 2 hours to let the food digest so you don't get acid reflux. Number 3, a 30 or better SPF. Number 4, once a week for fried foods, no more, to avoid issues with type 2 diabetes. And number 3 has become a fan favorite for me and others, is if you're planning on having lovemaking activities, consider having a salad or something very light, because it takes blood flow to digest the food, and that blood flow might be required for other activities as well. It's something to think about as well. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Tschüss German, au revoir. French, Lehithro, Hebrew, Hoda Hafez, Farsi. Hey do, Swedish, Zdravstvuyte, hello in Russian. Ni hao ma, hello in Chinese. Do widzenia, Polish. Hoda Hafez, Farsi. And in Jamaica, we say, Nuff respect, walk good man. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day. Bye for now. We look forward to our next conversation.